This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. Politics, unfortunately, is something that we have to pay attention to because politics is a matter of life and death. It can determine whether we're drafted into a war, whether we are forced out of our homes, whether we lose our property, whether we are caged for life, or whether, like Daniel Shaver, who was shot to death like an animal on the floor of a hotel by a very trigger-happy cop in Mesa, Arizona, or George Floyd, who had his life snuffed out by the knee of Derek Chauvin. Politics is a matter of life and death, so we must pay attention to it unless we want to end up like those poor people, those victims of state violence. But politics is outside of us. It is outside of our psyches, outside of our minds, outside of the inner drama that we all experience individually. And those of us who engage in politics, like me, I've been political my entire life. Many of us who do that do it at the expense of our inner lives, where it is also often a matter of life and death. That's why this episode is so important to me, because my guest this week was one of the most original and even courageous and acute political analysts I've ever read. And he still is. But he's one of the few people in my world, the world of politics, the world of life and death outside of our minds, who did finally pay attention to what was inside of him as well. And he made himself better. And I think, and I hope, he serves as a model for all of us who like to talk about what's outside of us much more than what's inside of us. Listen to my guest this week for what he has to say about politics, because he is, I said, one of the best at that. But also, please, if you are like him and me, listen to his courage in his description of what he went through in dealing with his own internal politics, the life of his mind. This is my interview with Freddie Deboer. I'm here with Freddie Deboer. I'm a longtime fan of his. I've been reading his work, his blog, and watching him on the internet for many years. I think starting in, when did your blog start? Like 2013, 2014?
Well, my first blog started in 2008, but I migrated from Blogger to WordPress and fetishization.com in 2013. Yeah.
2013. Yeah, it was right. It was exactly then. And you became, I started reading you, and you were remarkable at that time because that was when that was the moment of the sexual assault hysteria, I believe. Right then, what I call the hysteria, on college campuses. And I think you were quite critical of a lot of that, and but you were really much more broadly critical of a lot that was going on the left while being very much a leftist in various ways, right? And that's sort of how you made your name. But, I just thought you were sort of the best kind of dissident leftist there was, and I was a huge fan. And then you did something that I thought was just straight up heroic, and I told you this before we started recording, but you, after a few years of doing the blog and gaining some notoriety and having, very much a prominent place in our world of political commentators, you announced that you were leaving that position. You were going to stop blogging, stop participating in politics because of mental health issues. And you left, and you were gone for a while. I don't know how long, at least a year or two, right? From this work.
Like 3 years. Yeah.
3 years, yeah. And so I just didn't see you anymore. And then you popped back up and recently, and I was super excited. I didn't know you were back. I didn't actually expect you to come back. And your blog since then has had, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but I sense like just a general slightly different tone. I don't think the content's different really. Maybe there's difference in your ideas. I'd love to hear I would love to hear how you've changed. I mean, let's go ahead. Yeah.
I mean, I guess a big part of it is I'm just, I had exhausted my capacity to participate in culture war.
Yeah.
I'm no longer on Twitter, thank God. And so I don't get a lot of, just in the day-to-day cycle of the culture war, I'm sort of outside of it because I'm not on Twitter. But also I just, I never intended to be like a culture war guy. I just sort of found that by writing a portion of what I wrote about certain topics, it would sort of get me labeled as a culture war guy. But I just feel a total sense of exhaustion about it. I'm not particularly hopeful that anything's going to get better in that arena. And so I'm increasingly trying, a big part about my upcoming book, The Cult of Smart, due August 4th.
Yeah.
A big part of my book was like, okay, I want to write about bigger things than what people are screaming about on social media on a day-to-day basis.
And college campuses.
That
was kind of your main beat, I thought. Like you were really hammering the academic left, right?
Although, certainly many of the problems that I described are still there on campus, but you may have noticed that, like I said it would, the whole college campus uprising thing died. I said it at the time.
Isn't that wild?
Well, I said at the time, colleges are in fact uniquely poorly set up for effective activism because you have to replace the entire cohort of people every 4 years,
right?
And a lot of these students are going on to participate precisely in the economic system that they decry, in the sort of meritocratic sort of climbing the meritocratic ladder.
Yeah.
And so the campus uprising fizzled out, which is exactly what I said it would. But
I guess I wasn't super surprised, but it is remarkable how it was what everyone, not just on campuses, was talking about. It dominated pretty much the national mainstream media for a good few years. First, it was the sexual assault, what I call hysteria, and then it was what I call the race. I don't know what you would call it, the racism hysteria immediately after that. So that's basically 2012 to about 2016, 17, right after Ferguson. And then it just poof, gone. And we haven't heard of any protests on campus since. And it's amazing. And I got to say, to me, that's not so much evidence that there's turnover of the student body, which is totally true. It's just evidence that those beliefs that were purported to be deeply held on campus were not so deeply held. What do you think?
Well, I also think, so I often use the example of Oberlin as being, and what happened there as being it's sort of indicative of the whole system and the whole problem, which is that the Oberlin students brought a set of demands that were quite extravagant to Oberlin's president. And they said, among other things, so for example, they wanted to have specific faculty members fired because they didn't agree with their political beliefs.
Right.
But they also asked for, students to get paid to do activism, etc. But the biggest thing is that they said to this president, they said, these demands are non-negotiable. We're not going to talk about them. You just need to pass them. And so he just said, no. He just said, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to participate in this without the possibility for open dialogue. And after that happened, they had nowhere to go, you know? And colleges are in some ways exquisitely sensitive to what their students are asking for, but in far deeper ways, they are incredibly bureaucratic structures that operate on the basic principle that all bureaucratic structures do, which is defending the structure before anything else, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons, I believe that something like Title IX has to exist, but Title IX as it actually exists is not the solution to those problems. So one of the biggest critics I know of Title IX is a woman who used to work as the Title IX enforcement officer at a college.
Oh, wow.
And she quit in disgust because what she realized was that her fundamental job was not to prevent sex-based discrimination of students on campus. Her fundamental job was to protect the university from legal liability relating to sex-based discrimination on
Correct.
College.
That's right. Yep.
Or, all these colleges hired diversity officers and had, started offices of diversity. Fundamentally, those things, I'm sure the people working within them think that they're there for diversity, but what they're really there is they're there to head off criticism of the colleges as not being diverse enough, right? Because the system can only employ people whose first mission is to defend the system,
Yeah. Right. And you were at the time, were you in graduate school in education at the time?
Yeah. I was in an English department, but my focus was in educational assessment. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know you were in English. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Writing assessment of student writing, stuff like that.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Several months ago, when Carlos and Vanessa Abelar approached me about being a sponsor for Unregistered, I asked them the story about their company, Paloma Verde CBD, based in San Antonio, Texas, which is where Carlos and Vanessa both grew up. On the west side of town, Carlos said, the brown side. And one of the things that caused them, or maybe the first thing that caused them to launch the business, was that both of their fathers had done a lot of physical manual labor and both suffered chronic pain, which I can tell you, having experienced that for the first time in my life recently, is possibly one of the worst things anyone can go through. But Carlos and Vanessa had a hard time convincing their sort of old-fashioned conservative fathers about using this thing that they thought came from marijuana. But they did. Their fathers used the CBD and it cured their pain. So they launched the company to help people like their fathers, in particular on the brown west side of places like San Antonio, but they had a very difficult time doing that, in part because banks wouldn't give them loans or even bank accounts because they were a so-called marijuana-related industry. So I've been so honored to have them as a sponsor, and I have been absolutely thrilled that there are now unregistered listeners in virtually every state in the union who are now Paloma Verde customers, and very happy about it because Carlos and Vanessa keep reporting that there have been multiple orders by many of you. So I want to say thank you to all of you, but not thank you because, this is transactional. And I would not sponsor a company like this. I would not say things like this about a company if I didn't believe their products were actually good. I've been using their products every day since Carlos and Vanessa called me. I love their gummies. I love their soft gels. And as I've said for many weeks now, I discovered their tincture, which if I put a few drops under my tongue, I promise you, I swear, and I was actually surprised by this, my anxiety melts away. It's remarkable. So, Carlos and Vanessa, as many of you may know already, have already given us a 25% discount on all of their products. You just go to palomaverdestore.com and use the discount code RENEGADE and you get 25% off anything. Okay? Then on top of that, they have what they're calling formally on the website the unregistered combo pack, but what they call, to me, the Thad pack. They like to tease me about that. They actually text me often whenever they sell a Thad pack to tell me that. So that is my three favorite things. It's the gummies, it's the soft gels, and it's a high potency tincture. And you end up getting 33% off of that. It's a hell of a deal. and I strongly recommend it. And that's my regimen. That's my Paloma Verde regimen. So you can have exactly mine for a really good deal. Then they've added a new benefit, which is remarkable. They, just by joining their mailing list, the first time you go there, you get 10% off your first order. So that's 25 plus 10 is 35 on any item now if it's your first time there and joining their mailing list. This is an insane deal with fantastic products. You'll see their CBD is as good as anybody else's, and their products are fantastic. They all taste good and they work well and they make me feel good. So go to palomaverdestore.com, order some CBD products from Vanessa and Carlos, and enjoy your life. Thanks. So one of the things I think I've noticed, I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether I'm correct about this. I mean, it seems like that political discourse on campus that you and I were both critical of at that time migrated since then, since about 2018, 2019, into the mainstream. So that, and I think it informed a whole bunch of what's been going on since Trump was elected, which has been a very serious change in political discourse in this country over the last 4 years. And people like AOC and Ilhan Omar and those, I mean, they clearly come out of that culture. I mean, as soon as she opened her mouth, I said, oh yeah, I've seen hundreds of you in my classes over the last 30 years. I was a university professor at Columbia and Barnard and Occidental for 25 years. So I know that world extremely well. And do you agree with that? Like, it's actually filtered, seeped into the mainstream discourse?
I mean, it's always interesting to me how people tend to define the humanities as being completely ineffectual and not having any ability to affect change. And yet intersectional theory has become the basic assumed vocabulary of our entire media class and increasingly of our political class. I've said before, one of the things that you're paying for when you pay for a fancy liberal arts education is you're paying to get your entry into a particular discourse community, and being a member of that discourse community is very important if you want to go into media, if you want to go into publishing, certainly if you want to go into academia as your profession. So
that's right. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess it's not any different in a way than what's always happened, which is that people who were in the big publishing houses came out of English departments. They were English majors at the, the Seven Sisters colleges or the Ivy Leagues or whatever, right? And a lot of people who went into politics also came out of the humanities as well. That's where you learn how to put poetry to politics, right? That's where you learn how to fashion sort of effective rhetoric. That's where you learn how to create these narratives that are compelling and persuasive for people, right?
And you can see it filtering out with Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility becoming number 2 on the nonfiction bestselling chart or whatever it got to.
Yeah. Have you read the book?
I have not. I have had enough of white women telling me about racism in my life.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't either. I think I maybe have read snippets, or I got enough of her thinking some way, like either hearing her talk or something, that it was very clear what was going on there. Yeah, this what do you make of the white? It's not a white fragility argument. It's really like a condemnation, basically, of white people in toto, right? I mean, yeah. So what do you? We carry the sin with us, stuff like that kind of thinking. It is very religious, right?
I mean, one of the things is that if you object to this particular kind of racial discourse, which again is, I think, the example of Robin DiAngelo shows, it is a very much a sort of bourgeois white discourse, as well as one that we might associate with people of color. You're presumed to object because you are offended, right? In other words, you're supposed to say, "Oh, I'm mad because being told that I carry the original sin of white supremacy offends me and hurts me deeply." But to me, the problem is the opposite, which is that it doesn't do anything to harm me, right? Like as a white person walking around life and enjoying the fruits of white privilege, as I certainly do, it just makes no difference whether I'm supposed to carry around this guilt at being the bearer of that white privilege. the individual guilt is just almost never a effective means to change anything about the world. And I think that it's one of my biggest, most consistent critiques of the entire social justice movement is, to their credit, they talk about structures, right? They talk about structural change and how white supremacy is structural, that how patriarchy is structural. But all of the solutions tend to be individual, and they all tend to be really bound up in your emotional state, right? Like you're a good white person if you sort of have this internal, you're flogging yourself internally for sort of, carrying around your white privilege, but that makes absolutely no difference to the life of an actually existing Black person, right?
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, I've talked about this a lot very recently on this show with several guests, is that for me and for many people who have come on the show and others, and this was the problem for Malcolm X, by the way, that he identified, which was that not Black people, we got to get over saying that, but I think I think there is a very important category, which I call the Black political class, has centered white people in their consciousness and in their program and in their politics. Right. So that it's like the problem is, it seems like this is what you've been saying. The problem that they identify is what's in our heads, what white people's heads. So then the solution is to change what white people think about Black people. So therefore it becomes a paternalistic relationship or dynamic as well. Unwittingly, I'm sure they would never admit to that, but that's certainly what I see. It's like seeking some sort of favor or special treatment or really attention from a father figure who unfortunately is the white man. And that is I only see that in the Black political class, meaning people on, who are on campuses. These are all college educated people. They get these ideas from college classrooms, I believe. You simply don't hear this where I live in East Oakland on the streets. I don't hear people talking about white supremacy in East Oakland. You don't hear it in Southside Chicago on the streets. I don't think you hear it in the Marcy projects in Brooklyn. We know this. I mean, I've interviewed people who are from those places and they're like, 90+% of Black people in this country don't even know what we're talking about. That goes for white people too. This is an elite, and you said class, and thank you for introducing that. And I hang out with, unfortunately, too many libertarians who are deaf, dumb, and blind to class. And I actually think that class is always central. In fact, it might be the central thing. So this is all elite discourse. I mean, that's who goes to colleges, and that's where this stuff is talked about. It's just that the one difference now I see in American history is that over the last roughly 4 years since Trump was elected, that discourse has really come out and taken over much of mainstream discourse. But what is it about? You said bourgeois. I think you're right. There's something interesting. I mean, the bourgeois culture in this country since the 19th century has been about repression, largely. Repression of, desire, famously puritanical, et cetera, about order, about training people to be good workers and to be good citizens and good soldiers and all that. But mostly to be orderly and efficient, right? That's what the bourgeoisie wanted in the 19th century, because that's what factories are, right? They're the paragon of like making people into machines in a sense. And now, though, it seems to me they're peddling chaos. And that's what's very, I mean, in very recent times, I'm talking about just in the last like month or two. Wow. I mean, it's like they're taking orders from teenagers now, like Trader Joe's just, what was this ridiculous thing? They just decided to rebrand all their taco shells because a 15-year-old in California filed a complaint. And much of what I think civil society, like sort of the culture, what's in the media, what we say is actually literally dictated by the demands of adolescents who have been in college. Make sense to you at all? Does that sound right?
Yeah, I do think it's important to point out that the shit that they're getting, the stuff that Black people are supposedly being given, is not what has been the request of people who are actually marching in. I mean, as I wrote in that piece you mentioned, I fundamentally support and have to feel morally bound to support this movement. The movement has not asked to recast cartoon characters with other people's, with people of color's voices. They haven't asked to change Aunt Jemima. They haven't asked for Goldman Sachs to change its language policies, right? They've asked for things like like ending the carceral state, right? Like
Right.
vastly reducing the prison population and ending the prison industrial complex.
Mm-hmm.
The culture responds with all this symbolic junk that doesn't really add up to much.
Okay.
I mean, look, like I'm not at all hung up on the Washington Redskins being the Washington Redskins anymore. I mean, I think it's probably a good thing for the team name to change. I mean, it's literally Redskins,
Sure.
But I also know that like that is the kind of thing that our culture and our society gives when it is unwilling to give the actual structural change, right?
Yeah.
And so these things dominate headlines, and they create a feeling of forward momentum when in fact there is very little to show so far for these protests. I mean, it looks like Minneapolis is going to make some really serious, deep police reform, and I think that's a great thing. But beyond that, it's really hard to identify anything that has actually happened as a result of these protests that is not, people using their Instagram to talk about white supremacy,
Right. So you're making me rethink my position on this whole stuff, because I've just been so turned off by so much of it. Until just recently, when I sort of said, I think on Twitter, in fact, I said, hey, look, it's not just Minneapolis. We have cities all over the country that are doing radical reforms of their police departments. I mean, unheard of stuff that shocks even me. I mean, and it's dozens, maybe scores of cities across the country I've heard about, and talking about serious stuff, like, instead, like ending in Berkeley, where I live in Oakland now, but like in Berkeley, the current proposal is to end all traffic stops by police. Oh. I mean, yikes. But then again, I'm just like, I'm open to, I want to hear about this. Let's do this. Cause I'm basically a police abolitionist. We need to talk more seriously about what that's going to look like. And I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I definitely want to start that conversation. And you're right. I wasn't giving enough credit, I think, to the non-looting, non-idiot, sadistic, violent rioters. It was the vast majority of people in the streets, I'm sure, were not that. And that's what they were calling for. This is undoubtedly true. They said abolish police very clearly over and over again. So yeah, I guess we do need to give them a lot of credit for that. And we actually are entering a really important, probably radical shift in criminal justice in this country, which you and I and many, many, many other people for years and years and years have been screaming about, and no one was listening to us. So I got to say, even as messy and disgusting and horrible and dumb as so many of these protests have been in the last several weeks, that's what's going to come out of it,
Yeah, look, you go to war with I used to say in the anti-war movement.
You're about to quote Rumsfeld.
Rumsfeld. Well, so when people would talk about, in college, I was really deeply involved in anti-Iraq war activism, and I sort of turned that back around, and I used to say, because people would always say, why are there so many weirdos in the anti-war movement? Why are so many of the people so frivolous? Why aren't they serious? Why aren't they studying the way we're studying? And I would say you go to peace with the army you have, not the army you wish you had, right?
You go to peace, yeah.
Yeah. And and I think that's true here. It's like any movement that has sufficient people to be called a mass movement. In other words, any movement with enough people to actually get the juice to make some change, there's going to be so many weirdos. You're going to have people showing up with the sign about, take the fluoride out of the water, whatever. You're always going to have people who are there who latch onto one weird thing, and you're always going to have flakes. And yes, you're always going to have people who, just want to break shit because that's cool. That's just inevitable. And that's, and that was certainly true in the anti-Vietnam War movement was absolutely correct, deeply influential, and vindicated by history. Yep. But also, there were so many fucking flakes in that movement. There were so many people who were weirdos and whatever. So
including my parents, I will say. So I know very well. Yeah.
And so I think like you have to be a little bit forgiving of the appearance of the movement from the outside, because it's the people who are the weirdos are the ones who stick out.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm really glad I'm having this conversation with you, because I've just been so soured by it. And I never participated in it. I just stood back during this stuff recently and just was so grossed out by it. But I mean, in 2014, 2015, 2016, you know, when that was the top issue, I mean, man, I was ripped apart like so many people were about what we saw in those videos, right? Now I will say this though, I am all for some radical change in criminal justice, which might very well be abolishing the police. I am totally open to talking about that. However, I do think the issue has been totally misframed as simply a race issue. And this actually causes me rage. I mean, rage, because there are right now, as we speak, 500,000 white people in cages in this country. And last year, 19 white people, unarmed, were shot to death by the police, compared to 9 people who were black, who were unarmed and shot by the police. Now, I know it's disproportionate, but still, nonetheless, it is clearly not a system designed with the sole purpose of hurting black people. That is an incredible amount of collateral damage on your own side that you're willing to take if the mission is simply a racist one. Slavery, there was not a single white person enslaved. Segregation, there was not a single white person who was denied access to a swimming pool. Now we have roughly, close to half of the people who have been murdered or caged or and enslaved in prisons over the last 40 years of the war on drugs and war on crime were white. I mean, and there is no talk about it. And, the guy who was shot to death by that fucking cop with a rifle while he was crawling on his hands and knees in that hotel room in Mesa.
Yeah.
And Duncan Lemp, who was beaten to death by cops for nothing except for being a homeless guy. And I can go on and on and on. There was a 16-year-old blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid who was pulling out of his driveway in Overland Park, Kansas, middle-class residential area, and the cops put, I think, 19 bullets in him because they were told that he was suicidal, and that's how you deal with a suicidal person, apparently, as they're backing their minivan. There's a minivan towards you. This stuff is like as grotesque as anything that's ever been done to any black person by cops in this country, and it happens all the time, and maybe not as it's not proportionally equal, but in absolute numbers, it doesn't matter because we incarcerate more people than the Russians and the Iranians do. Right. We incarcerate more white people than Russians incarcerate Russian people in China, right?
Right.
And BLM couldn't give a shit, as far as I can tell. No one can give a shit. No one talks about these people except the weirdo libertarians I hang out with. That's, to me, the real problem. That is, there will not be, I think, a really solid, really meaningful movement that will make the kind of change I want until it is truly trans or post or non-racial in that way. It's a question of the state versus all of us, not, to me, a question of racist white cops who might be killing black people. It's so fruitless, I think, first of all, to look for the racism in cops as the solution. It's got to be structural. It's got to be about the law. The reason cops do what they do is because they think they're following the law, and they often are. They're often the guy. I don't know if you know about this. The Walter Scott case in South Carolina, the most egregious one ever, where he was shot in the back running away from the cop. Do you know that he did exactly what he was supposed to do according to regulations in the code in the police force in South Carolina? And that didn't come out until 2 years later, but. So that's a change in the law. That's not like figuring out whether that cop was racist or not. That's about, let's figure out why a cop is obligated to shoot someone running away from him if they think he has a taser. So I don't know. Does that resonate with you at all?
I mean, I guess, like the girl in the taco commercial, I said, why not both? I think that, I think that, I think that I do have to insist that the system as a whole, the criminal justice system as a whole, is systematically racist. I think the numbers behind that are very strong, considering the disproportionality of what happens. I think the drug war plays a huge part in what you're talking about, because the drug war is even more disproportionately set against people of color. But the system, while racist, is not only racist. The system is, I think, brutal and murderous and vindictive for everyone. I have said in the past that it would be cool if people could draw a connection between like Ruby Ridge, for example,
Thank you.
and the current criminal justice movement, in part because the guy at the center of the Ruby Ridge fiasco was himself not a good dude. He was part of a avowedly white supremacist militia group.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is that he and his son were out hunting. The ATF showed up in camo with assault rifles, immediately shot and killed the family dog. When the kid shot back in self-defense, they murdered the 14-year-old son. The guy runs into his house. As the door is open and he's running through a house, a sniper shoots and kills his wife, who was holding their infant child at the time, right? Mm-hmm. And the thing is I think that we have to be able to and willing to recognize these commonalities, even when the victim is not someone that we particularly care to hang out with, right?
Well, that by the way, that goes, I'm sure, for many, many, many black people who have been shot by the cops too. Not nice people, probably.
Right. There's, and that's one of the things that, like, I get why it's so important. I get why people are enraged by the tendency to say he was no angel, right? Mm-hmm. About someone who has been murdered by the police, and they're right to say the fact that he is no angel is irrelevant. Is totally irrelevant.
That's right.
Right. But I do sometimes think the hagiography of the people, individual people, it sometimes misses the point because it reinforces the idea. If you keep talking about how pure the person who was murdered is, that reinforces the idea that someone else might deserve it then, if they're not as good of a person. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that those resonances are there, and there are lessons to be taken. I think the Waco incident is another incident in which ATF again, I believe, in which we can demonstrate that the system is operating on several different levers, and one of those levers is undoubtedly race, but other levers are just people who sort of one way or another live outside of what is considered the norm of American society. Yeah. And they might be members of what was a cult, right? The Waco Branch Davidians were a cult, Yep. But that doesn't mean that you shoot at some of them and light a bunch of them on fire. Just like the guy at Ruby Ridge, he sawed off a shotgun and sold it, so they came after him. Is that enough reason to murder a family? That's right. But I think that those resonances are there, and I wish that we were in a better position to be able to say, hey, look, you should pay attention to this too. Mm-hmm. I don't think that at the present moment there's a way to say, hey, we need to get more white people into the discussion that is going to be productive with where the conversation is at right now. It's hard for me to imagine a vocabulary that I would have to be able to say, hey, white people matter too, because that's going to, because that's how it's going to be taken as a all lives matters, sort of bullshit deflection, rather than let's look at the resonances that affect everybody in society and the way in which the criminal justice system is brutal, even beyond its racism.
Yeah, but how do we get that movement? I want that movement. I want to have the relatives and friends of some of those 500,000 people in prison and some of the people who have been shot to death by police for no good reason who are white to rise up with BLM in the streets and fight the cops, and to go to and to lobby relentlessly for changes in laws. I mean, how do we get that?
Well, I think it could perhaps be an ancillary benefit of having another conversation that is related to this that I think we have to have, which is, I wrote a piece about this. People who are fighting for criminal justice reform, as they should, have to stop being naive about who is in prison. In other words, you talk to people about criminal justice reform and they always want to talk about nonviolent drug offenders. Well, I certainly think nonviolent drug offenders should be freed. Mm-hmm. But the best data I saw said that nonviolent drug offenders make up 4% of state prison populations.
It's small. It's relatively small. Yeah.
It's a bigger percentage of the federal prison system, but like first time nonviolent drug offenders are like 4% of the state prison population. Yeah. And in order to really free people at the scale that we want to, we have to be ready to free people who are guilty of assault,
Mm-hmm.
of sexual assault, which is a particularly thorny question, of potentially of murder. I mean, if you're talking about getting the numbers that we want out, if we want to drastically drop that number, there's a lot of people who have been convicted of doing really bad things who are going to have to be freed. And until and unless you are willing to like really own that and talk about, this is, a population of people, we're fighting for a population of people, many of whom are not good people. But what we so believe in this cause, and we so believe in the incredibly unhealthy system that we have now, that we have to get real about there are people who are going to be released that you might not necessarily want on the street anymore. But
yeah, this is one of the things I think about a lot, especially living in the Bay. I moved back to the Bay Area. I grew up here, but I moved back just last year after being away for 30 some years. And it's the same story. It's basically, it's not just white, but it's led by white liberal and lefty types who are, yelling about criminal justice and the assaults on black people in the streets, yada, yada, who have very little contact with black people. And one of the more, God, it's like someone needs to write some books or some very brave person needs to write or make a movie or something, write a book about, because I know many of them, and my parents have known many of them over the decades. In this town is actually fairly rough. It's actually much more dangerous here than New York City in terms of, certainly in places like Oakland and San Francisco. Those are violent cities, and I find myself much more nervous there than in New York City. There have been a number of these kind of like white lefties who have been beaten nearly to death on the streets by black people. Randomly, they were like the victims of like a mugging or something that went wrong, but it's that kind of thing. But my parents are like personal friends with a couple of people who almost lost their lives from being beaten to death by black people on the streets. And of course you can't talk about it. And this is not now the right wing will jump on that and say, this is evidence that it's nothing but black criminals and BLM is therefore discredited and yada, yada, yada. And there's probably going to be a racist undertone to all that argument. I'm just saying what you're saying. Like, we need to be real about who these people are, and then we have to be real about what we're going to do about them once we release them. The one solace I have, and this might be naive, I hope it's not, but I don't know if you know, but the FBI estimates that about half of all prisoners are there for not a necessarily directly a drug crime, but a drug-related crime. Mm-hmm. So if you're a meth head or a crackhead, if you're a meth head in Oregon or you're a crackhead in Compton, you're going to be poor, number one, and you're going to have a very expensive habit, number two. So what do you think that person's going to do? They're going to commit crime to make the money to feed the habit. Well, that gets them into all sorts of trouble, including a lot of violent moments. So I believe if the FBI is even close to correct, that a humongous percentage of violent people will cease to exist. A huge number of people who will rob you in the streets and then might have to become violent to get the money out of your wallet will cease to exist. We will become a much less violent society simply by changing that one fucking law. If you simply make cocaine and meth and heroin illegal, just that, God damn it, I believe that we would empty about half the prison population and we would have a much less violent society. And I think that black people generally and white people who are not middle class will benefit tremendously. I think that what we call the hood will be a different place if we just legalize drugs. Just that.
Yeah, I think that is, but it has to be. But again, it can't just be marijuana, like you said, right?
Everything.
Everything, and it's got and that's another, frustration for me. Yes, weed is probably going to happen first, and because it seems like a particularly egregious one. But I'm frustrated by people who are opposed to who support the decriminalization of marijuana, but not other drugs, because again, the knock-on effects that people complain about, the criminal justice effects that people complain about, are, if anything, create far greater problems with drugs like methamphetamine and cocaine, and now the opioid crisis.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That was really great. Thank you. That really kind of helped me. That clarified something that I think about constantly. I've written about this, like this is one of my main issues, but just talking to you in the last half hour clarified it, which is that was the experience I got from reading your blog, by the way. So I just want to express my gratitude for that. But I want to talk, if you don't mind, about like what happened with you around that time. Well, back then in the 2016, 2017. So you were deeply enmeshed. You were taking on a lot of sort of left wing, I guess you'd call shibboleths. You were getting attacked by some of the left, and you were being loved by some of the left, and libertarians and some conservatives also kind of started to gravitate towards you, right? And so you had this, I'd say, unique position in political commentary in this country. And then all of a sudden, you announce that you're not going to do this anymore, and that you're suffering, and you had to leave and go someplace. So, it was a loss. It was a loss for us because there were very few people on the left who were talking like you. But can you just talk about what was going on with you? I don't know.
Sure. So it's not complicated. I have a cyclical mental illness. I have bipolar disorder. When I was 20 years old, I was living in a little apartment, and I had been cycling. I had been experiencing a mood disorder without knowing it or knowing what that was. And I had a little red car that the transmission broke down, and it wouldn't go in reverse. And so when I would get back home, I would put it in neutral and push it into a parking space so that I can drive out the next day. But that day I had picked a space that was kind of sloping, and I couldn't get the car to go up without it rolling back down. And I was just in a complete frenzy of bipolar mania. Again, not knowing what that was. And the guy from my apartment building came up to me and was like, "Man, what are you doing? You can't do this by yourself." And I lost it at him, sort of screaming in his face. Somebody at the hospital later claimed that I had put my hands on him. I vehemently disagreed at the time. I don't remember that, but maybe I did. I don't know. Anyway, the cops showed up. Somebody in the apartment complex called the cops. I was in this towering rage, and they were kind enough not to put the handcuffs on me, but I rode in the back of the car. They took me to the hospital, and they gave me a shot of Haldol. And when that had set in, the doctor came in and said, "You have bipolar disorder," and we talked about it. And that was the beginning of decades of not dealing with it. I was on and off meds, mostly off, for my entire adult life until 2017, when this happened. I had another mental health issue. I did a bunch of really shitty things. I treated people terribly. I have
right.
I tend to have extreme paranoia when I am cycling, and so I accuse many people of disloyalty, and made a terrible false accusation of somebody.
I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. Which was one terrible thing to do. What got me back into the hospital was I threatened somebody, and again, out of a sense of perceived disloyalty. And because I was such a criminal genius, I did it in a voicemail. So they called me up and they said, "Look, if you go to the hospital tomorrow, I might still call the cops. But if you don't go to the hospital tomorrow, I'm definitely going to call the cops." So I called my brother, and he came right up from DC, and he took me to a facility here in New York. And that was the beginning of a long road out. I have been on meds now for almost 3 years, which is easily far and away the longest period. And it sucks in a lot of ways, but and that's why I had to go away. I was in a mental health crisis, and it took me a long time to dig it out. And I've been in a lot of different kinds of therapy and seen a lot of different kinds of doctors, and went to AA meetings for a year, and all kinds of stuff like that. So Now, the key point, I think, is that I accept responsibility, moral responsibility for the things that I did. People, no matter what I say, people accuse me of saying that I'm not responsible because I have mental illness. I've never said that in my life. I am absolutely responsible for what happened, and I'm terribly sorry about everything that happened. But I am culpable. I am responsible. The fact that it was influenced by my mental illness doesn't change the fact that I am culpable, that I'm responsible. But just genuinely, no matter what I say, people just always want to believe that I'm trying to shirk responsibility, even though I'm not.
Mm. Mm. Huh. Wow. Thank you. God damn, that was heavy. Well, so some of that I relate to very much. Not all of it, but my diagnosis, not that it's ever been actually formal, but there have been doctors who have certainly gotten close to saying this, borderline for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of the symptoms you're talking about sure sound similar to me. How does the what do you call it, the mania when you were in the rage with the car? Can you describe that feeling? Because I'm wondering if it's mine when I get into that.
So some people, people have different cycles with bipolar disorder. So it's bipolar because you cycle between depression and mania.
Mm-hmm.
When I was younger, the depression was much worse. I have, not entirely, but I have aged out of the depression to a degree, which is, great, obviously.
Yeah.
One of the issues for me is, so some people have fast cycling. So some people have what's called rapid cycling, which means that like when they're in the course of the day, they can, which is crazy to me. I have very slow cycles. They happen over the course of months. And one of the issues with that is that it's like the boiling frog, that analogy of you leave a frog in a slowly getting hotter and hotter and hotter thing. It'll boil to death or whatever without jumping out.
Right.
So it's a similar thing with me where it can be hard to perceive that things are changing because they're happening so slowly. But so a lot of people, the mania, it contains feelings of elation, like they feel joy, and they feel very often I share this, a feeling of invulnerability, like you can't be harmed. Oftentimes it's you become very grandiose. You develop a set of beliefs about how you're going to change the world and no one can stop you and stuff like that. People become very promiscuous when manic, a tendency to use alcohol and drugs. I personally, though, for me, it's paranoia is the dominant feeling, and I mean, it's a very friends of mine know this cycle well, which is I will start to accuse people of being disloyal. I'll have delusional belief that they have done something to harm me or something disloyal. And I will constantly test them to see if they're being loyal. And my accusations and my testing and my messing with them about it eventually causes them to reject me, which is then my proof that I needed that they were in fact disloyal. So it's a terribly sort of self-fulfilling sort of a thing. And so I have a tendency. So often there'll be paranoid delusions that are associated with manic periods. So I fear the railroad police, which is in the film Into the Wild. There's a moment where the main character gets the shit kicked out of him by like an Amtrak cop or a railroad cop.
I forgot that. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and that has been something that my mind is fixated on. And so I have told medical professionals in the past that I'm trying to avoid the railroad police, whatever that means. So, yeah.
Is this the paranoia? Is it about who is it about? Who are you paranoid about? Is it like people who are in intimate relationships with you? Is it friends? Is it comrades? Is it who
yeah, everybody. And it's always, again, like the sense that they have suddenly no longer care about me or care for me, and when it gets bad, are actively colluding against me. So the person who threatened to call the cops on me, that was a situation where it went from you don't care about me anymore to you're actively trying to harm my life, so I'm going to hurt you first, that sort of thing.
And was that a friend or was that a girlfriend?
It was someone that I had an intimate relationship with.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, yes, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I was wondering about that because a lot of these issues, certainly for me, but I know for a lot of people, come up, especially in intimate relationships, right? I guess I haven't had that kind of stuff with friends, but I've certainly had problems. Well, maybe I have, but thank you. That's also great because I know that a lot of people listening probably have the same symptoms, the same problems, and just hearing someone else experience them and talk about them the way that you do without any shame, with openness, is the greatest liberation for me. So also recovering alcoholic here. You said you were in AA.
Yeah, but I'm off the wagon, unfortunately.
All right.
It didn't stick. I tried.
Right. That's okay. I smoke a lot of weed, so whatever. But in the rooms, in the AA rooms, right?
Yeah.
It's, to me, that was the best thing about those rooms, was just what you just did right there. Was describing horrible moments, things that we did, and then taking full responsibility. And the best part, though, was B, just being shameless about it. That there is no shame anymore. And I'm so grateful for that. And it was simple. I never talked in AA meetings. I never said a word. I just sat there and listened, and I was so blown away. I mean, people talk. By the way, I mean, goddamn, take a camera into one of those rooms. You got the best movie ever made. I mean, that's right. Those are the most dramatic stories I have ever heard are in AA meetings. And it's people being so open to strangers, opening their hearts. It's an incredibly moving and beautiful experience. But more importantly, for me, it just was liberating. I have a ton of shame and guilt about all kinds of stuff, but not about that anymore. Although, I take full responsibility for it. I wish the hell it didn't happen.
Yeah.
I could have killed people. I could have killed myself. But I really, that's why I love talking to people who have gone through it, who have gone through the therapy, either mental illness or alcoholism or addiction, and have recovered. They are able to talk about themselves just as easily and articulately and brilliantly as they are able to talk about politics. And that's who I look for right now. That's who I want to get on this show. That's who I've tried to get on this show. That's kind of the theme of the show. Because that's what's always been missing in politics for me. That's one of the reasons I started doing the show, is that I was listening. I was a political person literally when I was born, and always have been, because my parents were Trotskyist revolutionaries. So I was always in politics, and it just felt psychologically, psychically, spiritually, whatever, emotionally vacant, except for the anger, which was always allowed, right? There's anger is righteous and revolutionary, but these were, I used to call them emotional cripples, the people I was hanging out with, when I was super into politics. And by the way, this goes for the Marxists I hung out when I was a kid and a young adult, and that goes for the libertarians I hang out with now, and that goes for like everybody I've ever hung out with who's a political person.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I don't ever date people who are political people. There is something, especially in the academic side of it, there is something so like mean in the fullest sense of that word, like narrow and harsh and unforgiving and also cruel. And it's I stayed in politics despite that, but I just kind of I've been trying to find for the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, of trying to find people who aren't like that, who are in politics but are actually decent, kind human beings. And kindness has become paramount for me, like in myself, and in intimate relations and friendships, and in politics. And I'm not willing to hang out with people who aren't kind. Did you know Michael Brooks, by the way?
I did not know.
Yeah, because I did. He's been on the show, and he was a couple times. We did things together, and it's funny. Michael's career. I don't know if you followed the Majority Report at all. Did you ever watch that?
I mean, I've seen it, but not very often.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because, I'm going to write an essay, I think, about Michael and that, and I've started talking about it. But he's a great sort of, his life is very, I think, is a really good lesson, because he was brought on by Sam Cedar to the Majority Report basically to make fun of people. And if you watch that show, it's all about ridicule. It's just ridiculing Sam Harris, who I hate Sam Harris as much as Michael did. I mean, I hate these guys just as much as they do, but like, they would just they would do imitations, impressions of their voices, right?
Mm.
And that would be basically the argument against Sam Harris or whoever. And it's like,
Right.
that's not okay. It's very juvenile. It's mostly it's anti-intellectual, and
Yeah.
it's also fucking mean. And I don't want to be around that.
Right.
Then when Michael had his own show, though, it was like graduate seminars, like in Marxist theory and in like South African history. And, he had like these top flight intellectuals on. It was Adolph Reed talking about class and race, and there was no ridiculing going on then.
Right.
And so I felt like, and Michael publicly, this was his thing. He kept saying publicly over and over again, even when he was on the Majority Report, making fun of people on a regular basis, we need to bring kindness into politics, and especially into the left. If the left purports to be about people, caring about people, we need to act like it when we don't. And so even though we weren't like great friends, we were, decent friends, but like the second day we were in lockdown here, he texted me from New York just to check in on me. And I said, damn, man, wow, that's weird. And he said, yeah, I'm doing that with all my friends. And I said, God, that's remarkable.
Did you see the interview with his sister?
I did, with Sam last night or yesterday or 2 days. Yes, I did. Yeah.
That was interesting. I didn't really know much about him, but it was interesting what she was talking about, how he felt, but felt he couldn't talk about publicly and stuff like that.
Yeah, and he was a total, and he was completely hated cancel culture. He hated identity politics and all this for the reasons that we do. Yeah. So he had such. I mean, this is why, like, I cried for a day after he died. Is that he was on a journey. He was 37 years old when he died, and he'd already done so much, but I could see him moving more and more toward this politics that I thought was the kind of politics that I wish the left had always had. And in fact, I said, if the left was full of Michael Brooks at his best, at his most caring, I wouldn't have left the left, probably, but anyway, how do you, Twitter is not good for my mental health. I've managed to I regulate it fairly well now. Being in politics, I'm not sure is good for your mental health, because I think it's akin to being a soldier in a war. It's just that without the physical violence, but you're always fighting.
Yeah. Well, I think that writing the book was cathartic for me and therapeutic, and just a very different set of mental muscles. You know that you're not going to be timely, so there's no pressure to attempt to be timely. That anything that you write about is going to seem out of date by the time the book actually appears on shelves. It's you can be sort of like a solo hermit or monk, and just sort of devote yourself to that project and work on it slowly. There are times, when I would, this is similar to when I wrote my dissertation. When I wrote my dissertation, I read 5 volumes of Eisenhower era education policy papers, and they were very long and very boring.
You're a true scholar.
and they maybe got me half a line in the actual document, but right, like, I was glad to have the opportunity in my life to do something like that. I was glad to have the opportunity in my life to dive into something without the need for immediate gain, and that's what the book writing process has been like for me.
Let's talk about the book now. Okay, so you have a history. Your history is in education, or at least studying education, and then were you ever a teacher? Yeah, there it is. The Cult of Smart. It's coming out. What'd you say, next week, basically, right?
August 4th. Yep. I'm not yet 40 years old, and yet I have 20 years of teaching experience, because in various things, because I've been I taught, one of my first jobs was teaching lifeguarding and first aid and CPR and stuff like that. Yeah. I was a tutor for the SATs and the GREs and the LSATs and stuff like that for 5 years. I have 10 years of freshman composition, largely college teaching. I've also taught graduate students oral English proficiency. I've taught some higher level undergraduate classes as well. So my experience as a teacher is really where the book came from more than anything. I felt over the course of the past 20 years that no matter what I was teaching, there were some students who were better at it and some students who were worse. And it seemed to me that some people just had certain facility, a certain natural talent for things, that some people were more naturally talented at certain subjects than others. But as someone who was in a doctoral program, reading all of this educational policy papers, educational media, educational peer-reviewed journal articles, the idea of a student's individual potential just never showed up. It was bizarre to me that that it was like a conspiracy to avoid talking about the fact that not everybody has the same intellectual gifts.
Oh.
And the thesis of the book is that if everybody does not have the same level of prerequisite ability at everything, then a system that hands out its rewards, like the reward of a stable life, right? Like a life well lived, a life of comfort with maybe a little bit of potential for going forward and furthering your career and making more money, that gets handed out on the basis of how well you do at school. Mm-hmm. But not everybody is equally good at school. And the basis, the linchpin of the system, what keeps it functioning, its moral argument for itself, is the idea that people get what they deserve out of the education system. And to me, that can't be true if you have an innate potential at certain subjects, and that potential is different from one individual to another.
So what do you propose as a reorganization of education?
So there's a couple different sections. There's one section that is for more immediate sort of things that can actually happen in school. Another that is much more sort of big picture, like here's how I would fix the economy, and it's full of classic sort of lefty stuff. I think the first thing to do is to acknowledge and recognize the fact that not everybody is equally smart, and that we need to stop building a system that only has paths forward based on the assumption that you are someone who can someday become smart, right? You can someday become one of the winners in the academic rat race. Among the things that to present the option for a vocational track so that students have the opportunity to move off of an academic track and not to a vocational track and earlier in life than they do right now.
There you go.
To be able to present people with non-academic, non-getting to college paths, right?
Yeah.
One of the big points I make in the book is that even if we succeeded in the policy goal, and it's a more or less explicitly stated policy goal of almost our entire political system, of getting everyone a college education,
right?
The value of a college education would drop to zero once everybody has one, right?
Right.
There was research done.
Right.
The National Bureau of Economic Research in 2006 put out a paper, and it looked from 1895 to 2005. It looked at the college wage premium. So the extra amount of money that college earners make compared to people without a degree. And they said the simple ratio between the number of jobs that need a college degree and the number of people with a college degree. So in other words, simple supply and demand did a remarkably good job of explaining what the size of the wage. That more or less the wage gap increased as college graduates were rarer compared to the number of jobs, and it decreased when there were more college grads compared to the number of jobs. And of course, it has to be, right? Like that. Right. That's inevitable.
Yeah, right.
But if Democrats and Republicans share anything, one of the things that they share is a constant push for to get more and more people a college degree. And I read about it, like Obama said it, George W. Bush said it, Clinton said it, George H.W. Bush said it,
wow,
Reagan said it, and I pull all these quotes out.
Right.
And so that's not going to work. And so we need to have more paths to success. So one of the things that's proven to be controversial with people who read the book is I say that if they have the support of their parents, 12-year-olds should be able to drop out. Yeah. I think by 12 years old, someone can say, this school shit is not for me. I'm not good at this. Mm-hmm. I don't like this. And there's many other things I'd rather do with my time. And people say to me, oh, what are they going to do? What are they going to do all day? Well, they'll do any of the things that human beings do. They'll go for walks in the woods. They'll read books. They'll build a treehouse. They'll do all these things that human beings do, because the ability to do well in school is not the only criterion for human success. So here's a story I tell in the book. I was at a cookout in grad school in my PhD program. And a bunch of grad students, mostly people I didn't know. There was a woman there. She's from China. Her husband was from China, was in a PhD program there, and she had a couple kids. And she was talking to someone, and she was bragging about how smart her older son was, and saying, "Oh, he's way ahead of his age group. He's in a robotics club." Then her younger son comes running by, and he's like making fart noises with his mouth or whatever, and being silly. And she says to the person she's talking to, "He's maybe not so smart." And I could tell that the woman she was talking to and I myself felt like, "Well, not so smart. What,
right.
You're calling a kid not so smart? Your own kid? How dare you do that?"
Right.
But then it occurred to me later on in the day, if she had said he doesn't have an ear for music,
yeah,
I wouldn't have cared.
Right.
If she said he doesn't have an artistic temperament, that's fine. He'll never be a great athlete. No problem. It's only with smart.
Yeah.
With smart is the only thing where if you say that he's not smart, then that's a death sentence, right? All that other stuff is fine, whatever, but every child must be smart. And that is what I'm trying to attack with the book. Like the idea that academic ability is like this sum totalizing value that determines your worth as a human being is deeply baked into our system and is something that needs to die.
Sounds like it's a cult of smart.
Yeah.
Good title.
Yeah.
God, that's good. That is so good. 12 years old. What would I have been doing instead of being in my 7th grade fucking algebra class, right? You know what I did in my 7th grade algebra class? It was the 8th period. It was the last period of the day. I sat in the back of the room, and there was these louvered windows that were really big, those big louvered windows. And when you would open them, it was big enough for the body of a 12-year-old boy to crawl through it. So I would wait for the algebra teacher to turn it to be writing a long equation on the board, and I would just roll out that window, and I would go home.
Nice. So,
but if I had the woods to go to and a creek to run in, which I did too, that's what I would do too. Best times of my best school days from K to 12 were when a few times when very kindly enlightened adults would take me on a cookie trip, and we would go like explore the San Francisco, or we'd go take a walk on the beach, or those are the times I remember, and that's when I learned things. We need to free those kids who don't want to be it, for sure.
I mean, you mentioned algebra, and one of the things I talk about. So there's a reference this great book called The Math Myth by Andrew Hacker. Huh. And one of the things that he demonstrates is just algebra fucks up so many kids' lives.
Thank you.
I mean, there are so many kids who can't get out of high school because they cannot pass their algebra requirement. And there's so many kids in college who we know most students drop out because they are failing a class or classes. And algebra, there are so many kids who just can't pass their algebra requirement.
That was me.
Yeah. And
algebra 2, and my son had an even worse time.
Yeah. And it's like, you know what? I absolutely acknowledge that mathematics are absolutely fundamental for human flourishing, but it doesn't mean that every kid has to pass algebra. It just doesn't. When I was working at Brooklyn College, I had a fairly quantitative job because I had to do all this assessment of student learning, and yet I never did anything remotely like algebra in that. And so
never. I've never used algebra. I think, I've used like very, very primitive algebra, maybe 10 times in my whole adult life, and I'm 54. Yeah. What is that? I forgot about Hacker's book. That's right. I remember that. It was this great moment of vindication because my whole life I'd been like, I think I'm smart, but when I look at a math problem, I am not smart. I am very stupid. I am very, very, very stupid. And that's one of the reasons I truly, by the time I graduated from high school, I had a 2.4 GPA, by the way. Mm-hmm. I had no clue whether I was above average in intelligence. Right. Not a clue. I had not a clue. I didn't know if I was fit for college. I didn't know if I was fit for any of this stuff. As soon as I go to college, like the second I arrived on campus, I flew. I took off. Like everything made sense. From 13 years of nothing making sense and everything sounding like the Charlie Brown adults, rah, 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 Mm-hmm. I really was just, I had no idea what these people were talking about. All of a sudden, like I'm reading Plato and it all makes sense to me. It's like, it's wild. And so I've said that, to me, that's just evidence. And my son's exactly the same way. He has an even harder time with algebra, but he can tell you all about foreign policy right now. He's 18 years old. He can tell you all about politics. He can tell you all about psychology, super astute, super intelligent. But when it comes to math, we're fucking retards. And I'm going to use that word deliberately.
Yeah.
And so that just tells me that guess what? This is certainly not news to Freddie Deboer. There are different kinds of intelligence. How about that?
Yeah. Yeah. And, and there's also, and not only are there different kinds of intelligence, but like, the reason why this has happened to a large degree is, as usually happens, the culture follows the economic dynamics, right? Why do people see school as being so totalizing and existential? And, in the second half of the 20th century, the uneducated labor market collapsed, right? So for decades in the American system, you could get your high school diploma, go to the factory at the end of town, and have a good life. Own a home, buy a couple cars, have kids, whatever. In the last few decades of the 20th century, that market collapsed, and it essentially doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
For people without college diplomas, suffer terribly economically in our system.
Right.
And so you take a look at the system, and what do people say? Well, if the only people succeeding are the ones with the college degree, let's just give everybody the college degree and everything will be fine. But it's not going to be fine because, number one, not everybody has what it takes to be a college student. Many people don't want to go to college. And number two, even if you succeeded, you'd be running in place because once everybody has a college diploma, it ceases to be a rare resource, and so it ceases to have financial value.
So let's talk more about your prescriptions. I want to hear more about what you propose, even the lefty stuff. I want to hear all of it.
Sure. So so there is a war going on in the lefty circles right now between proponents of a jobs guarantee and proponents of a universal basic income.
Oh boy.
Okay.
Yeah.
They both have really powerful arguments against each other in my view. And I think the only way that we can solve those problems is by using them together. So of having a federal jobs guarantee program where in the event of a recession, the federal government guarantees a job to anyone who wants one, who for a certain minimal level of income, that is designed specifically to be countercyclical and also to not compete with the private market. People say, what are these jobs? They can be everything from a gardener to producing video content for the internet. People have talked about this endlessly. Also, instituting a universal basic income would provide people with more leverage inside of the job market. So I think what people don't understand about a universal basic income is the idea is not just that you have like this basement of like the lowest level of money you can earn and you can still pay rent or whatever, but it's also because we know right now part of the problem, the reason we have such a yawning inequality from top to bottom, the reason that we have this huge inequality problem is people at the bottom don't have negotiating leverage with their employers. Even under the prior to the COVID collapse, we had very low unemployment. We weren't seeing real wage growth, and so there's a sense in that the applicant, the job holder, the employee just lacks a certain degree of leverage with their employer. And one of the things that universal basic income does is say, okay, I have the wherewithal to say, you know what, I'm not going to do your job for $11 an hour. I'll do it for $13.50. I won't do it for $11 an hour. And I have the ability to fall back on this universal basic income if I have to. And so in both situations that you're creating worker power, which to me is, I come from a more old school sort of lefty thing, which is that redistribution is fine as it goes. Taking money from the top and giving it to the bottom is fine as it goes, but that's never been the point of the left-wing project, right? The left-wing project is to empower the people in the bottom classes so that they can then secure their own interests.
Oh yeah.
It's pity charity liberalism where you're just giving people money for things leaves them less empowered rather than more empowered. It makes them more dependent. And so these kind of programs are programs that strengthen the hand of the lower classes so that they can secure their own portion of the pie. And they also do so whether or not you have a college diploma. One of the things I think that the colleges are really suffering from having students in the system who don't belong there. So when I taught at the University of Rhode Island, I had a kid who, and he's hardly my only student to say this, but I would talk to him about why he was struggling in the class. He just said, I don't want to be here. And I said, well, why are you here? College is voluntary. And he said, well, my dad's a fisherman. It's not exactly a growth industry, right? Like, where's he going to go to be a fisherman like his dad in Rhode Island? Perennially threatened class of people. Mm-hmm. In other words, his vision of what life without a college diploma looks like is a dying industry, and so naturally he feels compelled to go to college. I think there are thousands of kids who would rather be anywhere else, but feel like going to college is the thing you have to do. Yep. And I think it's bad for the schools, and I think it's bad for them.
Yeah. Okay. So the UBI, I have always been favorable toward, so long as it doesn't bankrupt the country and create a worldwide depression. And I mean that seriously. Like I actually want it to work. I hope it works. So I'm like, I favor it, but then I hear from all my libertarian friends that I'm a complete idiot for thinking this because it's going to destroy the economy and make things worse. And they might very well be right because they know a lot more about economics than I do, generally speaking. And I just haven't done the research. I haven't done the numbers. I don't know of Yang's program, what it would actually do, whatever. But I love left-wing politics is always utopian. For that matter, politics is generally, there's a utopian aspect in most politics, right? Mm-hmm. So that's fine. So we're talking about utopias. Who I doubt will ever pass a UBI, but if we did, I wouldn't be upset about it if the left. I like that the left is behind the UBI because there are no strings attached to the damn thing, right? I think that's the idea of it. In other words, everybody gets a check in the mail, no matter what they do, no matter what they are, no matter who they are, nothing, right? They just get a check in the mail. That's the end of the story, right? As opposed to traditional welfare, as we all know, which comes with all kinds of social workers coming into your fucking bedroom and asking you how many people you've had sex with in the last week. Right. Thank you.
And it typically costs, like with food stamp benefits, the majority of the price to society of food stamps is the enforcement mechanism to make sure that the means testing is working, not the actual benefit. It actually costs us more to make sure that people who are on food stamps are really poor than it does to give out the food stamps, which seems inefficient to me.
If it's all means tested, which it is, welfare requires a whole bunch of basically cops, which is what social workers are, by the way, who work for the state to enforce this stuff. Yeah, it's horrific. And I think it's made poor people, and in particular, disproportionately black people, as we all know, I say this, wards of the state. So, I've said this before, but like poor people and many of them are black people, but it doesn't matter to me. Poor people in this country, they wake up in the morning and they wake up in public housing. Yeah. Then the kid goes to school in a public school, government school. And then on the way home, they get hassled by the cops. Mm-hmm. And then they get home, their mom is talking to the social worker who is asking the mom questions about the groceries she bought and the men she slept with and how many children she's had, and et cetera, et cetera. And then the kid, when he graduates, commits a crime and goes to prison. Yeah. And so if that's not a ward of the state, I don't know what is. And so the old welfare system has got to go. I like UBI a whole lot, infinitely better because it has none of those strings. Now, so that was a really encouraging thing for me to see going on the left, broadly speaking. Okay, the federal jobs or the jobs guarantee, I gotta say, it is horrifying because it's horrifying to me that the left takes that up as a cause, although I'm not surprised by it. But I think there is a fairly big contradiction in that if you're a lefty these days, because what we're talking about is the government of the United States of America as it is currently constituted, right? Or the states, the state governments as they are currently constituted, being the employer. And lefties know all about the power of employers over their workers, right?
Right.
Being the employer of the poorest, most vulnerable, marginalized people in this country. So talk about wards of the state. Now, if they get out of prison, that kid I talked about, he'll be lucky to work for Uncle Sam. Now, that's not my idea of utopia. That is my idea of kind of a sort of a soft totalitarian system. I hate the idea of poor kids from Appalachia or poor kids from Compton working for the government. And in fact, by the way, that is in large part what happened with the black working class, after World War II, right? That's how humongous percentage of the black working class went into government work, meaning like working for the post office. Just a huge number of African Americans have worked in civil service jobs for the government beginning after World War II. And that was basically the way that instead of welfare, that's what the government did for decades. And so they got a place. African Americans got this really fundamental. That's why the DMVs and the post offices are all full of black people working there, right? And that's why we have you go to like a government office, welfare offices. It's all black people, often women, working there. That was the government's way of keeping them alive in a sense, without giving them welfare. But so I don't know, man. I'm
not going to do a defense of JG Justice. There are some serious people who are really into it. Yeah. I will say that they tend to be deeply invested in these concepts of the dignity of work and stuff like that, which I don't give a shit about personally. Gross. But I mean, the thing is it has to be genuinely useful work, because if you're just doing a make work program, you might as well just give them the money, right?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
But it's a big debate. And so I hedge my bets in the book. I try not to fall too far on one side or the other.
All right.
I mean, school wise, I just talk about loosening standards dramatically, changing, the Common Core is the exact opposite of what we want.
Totally.
One of the things that makes me laugh is that,
sorry, real quick. You know who invented the Common Core, the idea?
It's a conservative, right?
Oh, it's deeper than that. There's a person who actually invented that whole concept, Irving Kristol.
Right. Yeah.
It was a neocon. The neocon.
Right.
He actually came. They invented that idea. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, what drives me insane is that the biggest cliche in education talk, like if you like read the think tanks, which anyway, I won't get into the education think tank racket. But
it's interesting.
If you listen to the think tanks, the people always talk about the need for dynamism and innovation in education. A set of narrow standards is the absolute opposite of innovation and dynamism. Is literally the opposite, right? Teachers can't be dynamic and innovative in their classes if they're operating under the Common Core, because the Common Core is the opposite of innovation and dynamism.
Of course.
Look, like the Common Core presumes that every student is the same student. It presumes that every student will benefit the same from the same program, and we know that to be untrue. I would say just empirically, we know that to be untrue. So that's another one of my big hobby horses. Yeah,
the daughter of Haitian immigrants in Miami needs the same curriculum as the son of Bill Gates in Seattle or something. I mean, that's the assumption, right? It's like, what are we talking about here? But it's worse than that, right? Kristol's vision was to create a common national culture. That was the essay that Common Core came out of. I think it was even called that. Yeah. Common national culture. Ugh.
Which is not,
you want to talk about something that might sound like fascism, or a really bad capital C communism, one or the other. But it's the worst form of nationalism, so it's disgusting in every way. So the neocons invented the idea. Bush instituted it, and then Obama and Joe Biden, everybody, with Race to the Top, simply ramped it up.
Yeah.
Let's repeat that. I haven't even forgot about that crime of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyway,
so, what else you got?
So you can read it all about it in the Cult of Smart. It's you should pick it up. Available wherever books are sold. August 4th is coming out. So everybody home, check it out. Decide for yourself.
You have persuaded me to fully endorse this book. Everybody should read this book. Definitely. I love your arguments, man. I love your arguments. Yeah. Even the piece I didn't totally love. The overall thing is great. What a great intervention. Can we finish by talking about our love of teaching?
Yeah. I love to teach. I'm not sure.
I assumed you did, right? And I have, since the second I walked into a classroom as a teacher, I didn't know it. I didn't expect it. But I said, oh, God damn, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
Well, how about you?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm ever going to get to do it again since I've left Brooklyn College. I was teaching there along with my admin duties. We'll see. I'm applying to jobs everywhere. but I love it and I'm good at it. And I think that a ton of it is just attitude. And I think you have to walk in and own the classroom.
Yep.
And I'm lucky in that I don't have the gene to be nervous about public speaking. I just like it. It's not like it's something that I train myself to do. I just don't get nervous about speaking in public.
Right.
And that helps a lot too. But I talk a lot in the book about, what I've learned from my students and that, the thing that pushes me to write the book more than any other is how badly I think some of them are being served by a system that is not designed with their actual best interest in mind.
Yeah. What is it though about that interaction with a student in a classroom that gets you, that really motivates
I think
you, makes you feel good?
Yeah, I think it's just the sense that it's always remarkable to me the amount of trust that students put into us simply by being there and opening their brain. There's plenty of students who will push back and plenty of students who will give you a hard time. But at the end of the day, I think most students are just like, I'm here, man. Fill me up with knowledge. Tell me what you want to tell me. And that's very sacred to me.
And the thing is, you know what? That claim is actually generally honest, I have found, even among very young people, because now most people would say, well, but look at the kids in the classes. They're all bored and they're not even paying attention. I'm like, yeah, guess whose fault that is, dumb shit. Like that's because the teacher sucks. I would give like lectures at Columbia to 200 students, and I was so attuned to every one of them that I would flip out internally as I was giving my lecture. If I saw one kid kind of fade away a bit, you have to, in my view, to me, the mission of a teacher, a good teacher, is to get inside the heads of the students, but wait, in a different way, to understand them first, right? Rather than just to infiltrate their minds with our ideas. If I don't know what the person I'm talking to, like you, is thinking at all, I panic. I can't deal. Like, I don't understand. I'm sure you've seen, I know you've seen lecturers get up there in college campuses and just hold forth for an hour and a half as if no one was in the room. Right. That's actually the common lecture style. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. As if no one is there. Like there's nothing changes. If I have seen people lecture to famous professors, lectured to halls full of students who are literally on their computers or whispering to each other or are actually unconscious.
Yeah.
And they just continue talking about the War of 1812 as if it doesn't matter to them, which is like, we're all narcissistic in our own ways, but that's some weird kind of particular narcissism that it's terrible pedagogically, but like, I was always shocked by it because I don't know what it is about my narcissism, which is different. I need that kind of, that I don't know if it's need for affirmation or need for attention or something, but like, if I don't have your attention, like I can't teach and I flip out. So I constantly need them to not be bored. I can't be boring. And that's almost more important than the content. It is more important than the content. Because no one remembers what Plato actually said. What they remember is how to think about texts. And what they remember is sort of the teacher's behavior, modeling behavior. And this is how it is to be a thinker and an intellectual and a scholar and all that, right? They take that away from it, but they're not going to remember what's on page 37 of the Grundrisse.
Right.
But does that make sense to you? Does that sound right?
Yeah, man. Sounds great to me.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Freddie, I got to say, I saw you, I remember seeing you on a Connor Friedersdorf webcast just like this several years ago. I don't know if you remember that one. You guys kind of got into it a little bit. It was no big deal, not an argument, but you seem like quite a different person now, just in your demeanor. You were you seemed unhappy then.
There's about 1,500 milligrams of reasons for that.
Yeah. I
my demeanor, is definitely a little bit altered.
Yeah, I told my girlfriend before we started, I said this guy's great and I've been following him forever and I think I love his ideas, but I got to say he's a little gruff. And but in this interview, you've had a very different demeanor, and I got to say I have enormous gratitude and respect for all of your openness and honesty, especially about your own struggles. So
absolutely, my pleasure.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for doing this, and best of luck with everything, and good luck with that book. And everybody, go get that goddamn book.
Absolutely. Go get it. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
You got it. All right, Freddie. Have a good one.
Later.
Bye. Thank you. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To join the new Renegade University, go to renegadeuniversity.com. To join the new Unregistered Underground, the supporting listeners group for the podcast, go to unregisteredunderground.com. Thanks for listening.